How's it going, everyone? Bryce Newberger with the Soul Ward here. And we're back with a video from Kirk Cameron. He asked a very good question. He was asking, does it help or does it harm? Are therapists lying to you? Now, I thought this was very fascinating for me to kind of give a brief reaction and commentary to, just on the initial questions that they get into. I want to say, personally, so I run the Soul Ward. People book pastoral counseling with me. I'm also a trauma support specialist. I am certified in the strategic approach to suicide prevention, psychological first aid, all of these kind of psychological therapeutic things. I've also, studied cognitive behavioral therapy, internal family systems, EMDR, analytic psychology, which is like Carl Jung and some Freudian stuff. And so I find psychology fascinating and important and useful, in the same way, though, that I find philosophy fascinating and important and useful. But philosophy is not a replacement for theology, and therapy is not a replacement for theology. And so I find myself, I offer pastoral counseling. So I'm in a weird zone because I'm not on the pastor side, like in a church, and I'm not a therapist side where I'm working in a therapy office. I'm right there in the middle. And there are times where I refer people to a pastor, and there are times where I refer people to a therapist, right? And so I just recently had a situation with a client where I was like, hey, your issues are beyond me. Let's get you to a substance abuse counselor, right? And let's get you with someone who is trained and know what they're doing. So it takes a lot of wisdom as well to know how far should I go, where do I stop, and all of that. But ultimately, what I offer is right in what I think is the sweet spot, but right in the middle. I'm going to pastor people through their pain, and I'm not going to over spiritualize it, right? I'm going to acknowledge how God designed the brain, neurochemistry, the nervous system. I'm going to explain some grounding techniques. I'm going to explain how trauma works, the history of trauma, and help them track negative cognitions. And then we're going to use some CBT and some other things to defeat those cognitions. And ultimately, again, as a Christian pastor, we're going to bring those things also before the Lord. And people on my list, I think one thing different between me and a therapist is people that my clients go on my prayer list. So every morning I'm praying for them and beseeching the Lord on their behalf for specific things that God puts on my heart. So I think there's this interesting tug of war that I've been stuck in my life where when I was growing up, I was just like, I want to help the world, right? Like I read, like my pastors were my role models, and I had this innate desire to kind of heal the hurting part of the world. I was like, I saw, like my parents would argue, I'd see my brothers get into issues, and I want to get into the chemistry of this, and I want to like heal it. And as a young boy, I was like, that's theology, that's God. God fixes everything, God heals everything, and I still believe that. So obviously I was like, I will be a pastor, right? So from about 15 years old, I was like, I'm going to grow up and I'm going to be a pastor. That's what I want to do. So I graduated, got involved in seminary, got involved at, volunteering at churches, became an intern at a church, and eventually went on to be a pastor. And what I found as I got to become one of my heroes, right? Pastors are my heroes. I got to become one. I found a very human system. I found a very human organization of the church, and it wasn't as heroic or even as godly as I thought it would be. Men that I served under who were older Christians was like, oh, like this is going to be different than a boss. Cause I had worked in the corporate world before I, earned the right to make half the money and work for a church. It's funny how that works. Right. And I thought, man, these guys are going to be better than any boss I've had. They're going to pastor me. They're going to mentor me. It was not that way for the churches I worked for. They were more corporate minded than the Christian CEO I worked for a cloud computing company for years. And the CEO of that company was a Christian, though it wasn't a Christian company. I often say he was the best pastor I ever worked for. He was far more godly and Christian and mentoring and discipling than any human pastor I've ever worked under. So it's funny how that works. And so I began as I was young, and then I got into my mid-20s, and then I got into my 30s. I began to encounter depression, anxiety, stress, not just in myself, but in everyone around me. And the church's response to these issues in the early aughts, the 20 teens, into the 2020s, has been a lot of, like judgment and misunderstanding of therapy. And so I thought, man, they've really thrown the baby out with the bathwater. I worked for a church. They had an issue where I had to report them and resign because they weren't handling a certain adolescent issue very well. And I said, listen, I can't work for you. I got to go. And I reported them to their denomination because I think what they were doing was very wrong. And then I washed my hands of it and I walked away. I was in therapy at the time. And my therapist was talking to me, I was talking to my therapist about this whole situation and how to handle the anxiety and the stress of, basically walking away from an organization without anything else lined up. Where my wife works as well, so it's not as terrible as it sounds. And she's got 2 master's degrees and she's way smarter than me. So I got lucky. I got a sugar mama. But, and so, but there's still a little bit like, it's not like she's drowning in money. It's like, we gotta, bills are gonna be tight. We're gonna have to trust God. And she was like, well, would you want to come work for me? And I thought that was interesting. I didn't know this, but as a pastor, I counsel people all the time. It's a large part of the job. You're meeting with people, you're getting coffee, you're paying for coffee, right? You're there through all of their life's issues. And, people reach out to their pastor. And so I didn't know that a lot of my people, like a lot of my congregants that I was discipling, that I was pastoring, I didn't know that they were also going to this therapist for therapy. So everything that I was telling them in our, pastoral counseling time, she was getting reported back to her, and she's like, "You're good. Your instincts are good. Like, let's train you." And she was a single person, like single employer company. It was just her. She wanted to grow her practice, but she wanted people she knew she could trust because health over harm was a big thing for her. And she helps a lot with church hurt. And that was one of her specialities was like church hurt and trauma and all of that. And, kind of helping people who are deconstructing. And she saw that she trusted me. I could be a voice here. And so then I thought, okay, this is my hero, right? This is who I want to be. And so then I started like, well, you know what? I'm going to get a master's of arts in counseling. I'm going to, become a counselor. I'm going to work in a counseling office. I began to dream of it, of just that, that kind of lifestyle of being a counselor, being a psychologist. And I was like, this is going to be great. And so then I got involved in that world. And as I got involved in the counseling world, I began to see, unfortunately, that a lot of that church hurt, a lot of that religious trauma lives in the body of the counselors themselves. And that there does seem to be a lot of bias against God in Christianity. And it's difficult to find a good therapist who is not jaded against specifically the Western Christian religion. Now, I ran into a lot of people who were like, no, I'm a Christian counselor, but they're Unitarian. They're kind of all roads lead to Christ. And, there's not that kind of orthodox, that right, not the Catholic Orthodox, but I mean, orthodox by definition means right belief. There's not an orthodoxy to what they're offering. And orthopraxy is right living. A lot of it's lacking in orthopraxy as well, in right living. So right belief and right living. And so, man, as I got into that world, I began to see how I was really going to be a black sheep there as well. And not only, it wasn't about belonging, because at the end of the day, it's just about, like me and my clients. But it was a tough situation to navigate, because the pastoral side seemed to be lacking some of what we needed, a lot of what we needed. It was, and I learned that seminary does not make you a good boss. Seminary does not make you a good psychologist. And a lot of times, orthodox doctrine, like kind of that, like I want the right doctrine, I want the right belief, can get in the way of learning. And so when it comes to reading people like Freud or Jung, who were by all accounts heretics, but like Oppenheimer didn't have to be a devout Christian to know how to build the atom bomb. You know what I mean? Like the Wright brothers didn't have to be good Christians to build a working plane. So at a certain point in time, you got to check your religion at the door when it comes to certain schools of learning, and then you take the baby with the bathwater, right? So like Jung's archetypal language is very useful as long as you can sidestep the mysticism. And I think when you're learning these things, for the average Christian, it's like, well, that's a slippery slope. Yeah, but if you want to be the expert on these things, you have to be able to navigate that slope, right? Sure, maybe the average congregant, the average Christian, the average client wouldn't have that wisdom or that ability, or it's too tricky for them. But if you want to be an expert in this area, you have to go read, right, the archetypes of the collective unconscious and go, okay, like I see how the brain works with archetype, and not be pulled into some Unitarian mysticism. So anyways, the tension that Kirk Cameron is going to deal with in this video, we'll get to it because I've already talked for 12 minutes. But the tension he's wrestling with is one that he's kind of asking the question from the outset. Oh, that's an interesting question my son asked me. Let me play with this question for one episode. I've been living in this for years, and navigating this tension for years. And so I thought I might be able to add a little bit more perspective to his questions. So let's get into just the opening part. Let's just get into the opening part of his video, and let's listen along. Let's make sure our desktop audio is working good. Let me mute my mic so it doesn't feedback too much. Made that mistake in the past. And let's listen in for a moment. We won't listen to the whole thing. It's only a 35-minute video. It would be like 2 hours if I reacted to everything, though, because I'm verbose. But here we go.
Using AI, ChatGPT, as their therapist. They talk to their girl on the phone, right? Like, I can't believe, all right, here's what she did to me today. I said this, you know the whole story, remember? And this is ChatGPT. It's even a human being. This bot doesn't have any wisdom.
Is therapy helping people become healthier people and more well-rounded individuals, or is it telling them comforting lies about themselves? That's what we're going to be talking about.
So I want to talk about the dark side of therapy, which is actually a book that exists called The Dark Side of Therapy. I forget who wrote it. He's got a little Jesus there. I didn't notice that before. Little Jesus there. Anyways, I have spoken with Christians who go to secular counseling. I've spoken with young adults who are not Christian, who go to secular therapy. And this is an issue within therapy itself. Like when you get into the community, a large part of therapy done right is you want to empower the individual self. So you want the client to find health and healing and agency and autonomy within themselves. You want them making their own decisions. What a lot of people want to do with a therapist is they want to hand off that autonomy to the therapist. What should I do? Tell me what to say, right? It's funny because in the Apple Plus TV show Shrinking, I was watching Hot Ones with Jason Segel. I don't know how to say his last name, but he's the main character in the show. And while doing Hot Ones, he was explaining hey, our show doesn't really follow exactly therapy by the book. He's like, it's kind of a dream therapy. It's like where sometimes you want a therapist to just tell you the right thing. And in that show, a lot of times that's what they do. They're just like telling the person thing. And that's not, as a therapist, as a counselor, that's not really what you want to do. And that's a big difference between pastoral counseling and therapy, where pastoral counseling can harm and therapy can help, is a lot of time with pastoral counseling, you're like, pastor, tell me the right thing. And the pastor's like, this is what the Bible says. This is what you should do. And unfortunately, when you get pastoral counseling, a lot of times, because you're a congregant at that church, there's a high expectation for you to follow through with what they say, or there's severe religious disappointment. And that can get really messy really quick, right? So then your pastor's like, you need to stay with your husband, right? Who's abusing you physically. And then the person's like, well, I don't want to stay with them. So they leave. And then a lot of times they have to leave the church. Or flip it, right? They might be like, oh, you need to separate from your spouse because they're doing this awful thing. And they go, well, I don't want to separate from my spouse. Well, and then it creates tension in the church, or tension with you and your church. And a lot of times you end up leaving the church. And so pastors, because they're not trained in these kind of therapeutic practices, and the term for it is, it was in my trauma certification. There's a great term for it. And I even have a whole seminar I give on it to churches, but I can't remember the name for it. It's a big clinical name anyways. I would just be showing off, which I can't do right now. But essentially the idea is you want them to be able to trust themselves and heal themselves. And a lot of times the pastor, it turns into trust me, the pastor, and what the Bible says. And as a pastor myself, I want you to trust in the Bible too, yes, but don't trust me. Trust Jesus in the Bible and yourself, right? So give your ways over to the Lord. He'll guide you and direct you. I'll try to help out with that. But at no point in time should I rob you of your autonomy. But I've seen this with a lot of young adults in therapy. And it's either, it's one of two things. They either have a bad therapist, which I don't know because I'm not in those sessions. I don't talk to the therapists. Or they're just bad listeners, right? And taking whatever they want out of therapy, which is most likely what's happening. But they begin to not trust themselves. They become so reliant on their therapist. They need a session every single week now I've got people I meet with every single week, but that's usually because like someone has died and we're working through grief, right? The goal for me is to work myself out of a job with that one client, right? And rehabilitate them and get them to trust themselves. And then we do checkups every so often, right? Every few months, just be like, hey, how you doing? Are you doing good? You want a session to talk about something? But it's not, it shouldn't be a weekly, I need my therapy. Because what happens is you give up trust in yourself. And I see this with young adults. They start not trusting themselves. They start handing off their agency. And it's very tempting to do that in a session where you're like, I think I know what the right thing to do here is. And I think I should just tell them what the right thing to do is. But if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. So the solution isn't to just hand them the right answer for that situation. And you could be wrong too, because you're not living their life, right? You don't have to live with the consequences of your actions, of their actions. So, right. But all that being said, you should be like, well, let's help them arrive to a conclusion that feels right for them instead of just handing them a solution. And then in future situations when they don't have, when they're not sitting on your couch, they can come up with the answer themselves. And that's what we want to see, when people are going through counseling and therapy. We want to see more and more and more that they become self-reliant and confident and having agency in their own choices, right? So don't rob people. This is what my friend used to say. She passed in October, but this is what my friend used to say, who hired me. That's a, update. My friend who asked me to come work for her, she was killed in a car accident in October. Very sad. I'm still grieving. It hurts. But she used to say to me, don't rob people of their autonomy, right? Because we would do these debriefs, right? We'd meet and we would talk about our client load. My clients understood like, hey, I work with her. I'm under her umbrella. And, she checks me on some things. So I don't go sharing with the world. There's still protection over all your things. It was just with my supervisor, we calibrated. But she would say, don't rob people of their autonomy, right? Don't steal people's choices from them. You want to empower them. Because as a pastor, it's very, very common for a pastor to be like, here's what the Bible says. Here's what you should do. Have fun, right? And I've seen a lot of young adults trust themselves less and less and become more and more reliant on their therapists. And I just firmly believe that their therapists don't want that, right? But young adults want that. They're like, just give me an adult. Because when you're a teenager, you know everything. When you're a teenager, you know everything. By the time you turn about 22, you know nothing. And you know nothing. And you're like, I want an adult to tell me what to do because life is hard. All right, let's listen on a little bit longer
about today, but before we get started, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Dad?
Man, you're getting in some hot water again today, James. I actually really do appreciate therapy, rightly understood, and I also have a healthy fear of therapists who actually make some people's problems worse. I just got to say it. I can't wait to dive into this with you.
Yeah, I think the first question that I have for you is, have you ever been to therapy?
Have I ever been to therapy? I need therapy.
You
is
definitely
what I need. You know what? I don't think I've ever actually been to a therapist, but I've had friends who are therapists and they kind of talk to me like I'm in a therapy session.
So that's another important thing. One, Kirk Cameron, it's tough because if you're going to make an episode on therapy and you haven't been to therapy, it does kind of make it difficult to comment on it. I'm just going to say, right? Because it's like, I'm going to teach you guys about basketball. Have you ever played basketball? No. Right. But I've heard of it. Right. And so, because even therapy is protected too. So it's like, I've never even watched a basketball game, but I have friends who are basketball players and they talk to me like I'm a player on the team. So there's this big thing about transference and all of that. And the big difference between pastors and therapists, again, is pastors, you're in the lives of your congregants. If you're pastoring right, you're discipling them, you're loving them, you're inviting them over to your home, you're eating with them, you're breaking bread with them. They're brothers and sisters with you, right? Child dedications are another thing. Like, I haven't gotten my baby dedicated yet because I haven't found the right church to dedicate him in, because a baby dedication is a group of people saying, hey, we are with you and your family, right? A lot of people just do it to check the box, right? But for me, a child dedication is surrounding myself with trusted people going, hey, we love you, we love your kid, and we're in it with you, right? So when you pastor correctly, you are joining the life of the person. A therapist, very, very different. They are not your friend. They're not your brother. They're not your sister. They're your therapist. And to cross the boundary into friendship. So I'll put it this way. I've got this as a youth pastor for a while. I love just the whole teenage experience. Like, navigating life is so difficult, and I love helping with that. A lot of the teenagers that were with me when I was a youth pastor have grown up, and they're now 26 and they're having kids, and we talk every day, and they've become some of my best friends. And now they're adults, and we play Warhammer together, and we share painting videos of us painting Warhammer, and we get together for games, and they tell me when their babies are born. I'm like, that's so beautiful. It's so wonderful, right? I love your life and what's going on. I pray with them, right, through heartbreak and death, and as, their parents get sick, or as, stuff goes wrong in their life, or as they have marital issues, right? As a pastor, I'm in it with them. They're my friends. They're my brothers. They're my sisters, right? As a therapist, you have a hard line. And so I've got this client who his number one thing is he wants to make friends. And he's a great kid, super smart, super cool. And he's into everything I'm into. And so he's constantly like, hey, did you see this video game? I'm like, no, what video game? He's like, Marathon, check it out, And I'm like, what is Marathon? And so he's teaching me, Helldivers, check it out. And so, I would love to hang out with him and play video games with him outside of our sessions. But to do that is a tricky thing, because I want to teach him how to make friends. If he paid me money to have sessions with me, and then I find out, well, we really can have a friendship, which we really could, I might lull him into just being my friend and never teaching him how to make a friend. And as my friend and mentor was killed in October in a car accident, God forbid, something could happen to me, and I could be gone someday, right? Or whatever, right? So something terrible could happen, or unfortunate, whatever, and I'm just not able to be his friend anymore. or to hang out with him or have access to him, or I'm dead or whatever, right? And he never learned how to go make his own friend, right? So what does he do? Like, well, what worked last time is I hired a therapist, or I'm not a therapist, but I hired a counselor, and then they became my friend. And it's like, it's not a good lesson. So as much as I would like to, game with him over the weekend sometimes, that's not my role and that's not my goal. Whereas a youth pastor, you can totally do that. Like, yeah, let's game, bro. Like, let's hang out, bro. And then because you're hanging out with them in a youth group, you can connect them to other teenagers. Like, oh, he likes what you like. She likes what you like. Why don't you guys hang out? Why don't we all hang out together? Why don't we, do like have a Halo party or go, to Disney on a trip, for youth camp or whatever. And you can help facilitate that. But in a session one-on-one, my goal right then and there is to figure out what is getting in the way of, someone not making friends, usually some sort of social anxiety rooted in some sort of trauma that's creating a negative cognition, and some sort of cognition that we need to unpack and redeem, right? And that's the pastor side of it too, and I think therapists agree with me. It's where they're very similar, is we want to take that bad thought, that the bad cognition in the head, and we want to heal it. We want to redeem it, right? We want it to be, and the Bible says you are beautifully and wonderfully made, right? So there's things where in therapy there can be overlap if done correctly. Let's listen on. Oh, and all that was in common up. He's like, I have friends who talk to me like a therapist. Yeah, but it's never the same as therapy, because, like, it's not the same as therapy, because therapists have that hard line. And yeah, so anyways, that's an important nuance.
But I've got good counselors in my life, and for them, I'm deeply grateful.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that the word therapy is actually not in the Bible. Therapy, like therapist, is not in the Bible, but there is a word that is used in replacement of therapy, and it's counseling. So
counseling.
Like wise counsel.
Yeah.
Or bad counsel, wicked counsel. And so when we're talking about...
Okay, I want to push back on that. Let me grab my baby just woke up. Let me grab him. I'll be right back. All right, we're back. My baby is over there. Hi, baby. So the difference between therapy and counseling, the biblical concept of counseling is to receive wise counsel from like an elder, someone trained in the faith. It's very similar to pastoring. Therapy, in the clinical sense, is we want to heal a disorder, right? So with therapy, there might be more diving deep into so a good example of how trauma works is you have some trauma in your past, and you learn as a kid, like there's these pillars that kind of hold up understanding for children. And when one of the pillars is shaken, a divorce, a death, a harm done by a family member, something like that, right? Or even just a scary situation, it shakes one of those pillars that a child relies upon. Could even be an adult, but usually, goes all the way back to her childhood. And the child then learns, okay, based in fear, okay, I've learned that I can't trust that pillar of understanding, that pillar of some really important childhood, whether it's the concept of home or the concept of father or mother or brother or uncle or whatever. And so even safety. And so they go, okay, I have to find a way to protect myself or feed this need, right? However the situation, I'm being very, general here. So then they come up with what's known as a coping mechanism, right? And I'll call it a maladaptive coping mechanism. They adapt in a bad way to cope with the loss of this important structure in their life. So they do something like stealing, like lying, right? Like bullying, whatever. And then they go, okay, and therefore I've met my need. And so it becomes a bad way to handle your problem, because the solution to it is trust and healing, right? And sometimes unpacking grief, which demands an empathetic witness, and sometimes children don't have that empathetic witness in their life that they know of. So as they grow older, more of these traumas happen, or maybe it's even self-inflicted because of the maladaptive coping mechanism. And so therapy, what we're going to do is when you sit with someone, when I get counseling from a friend, from a pastor, from a wise elder, a mom, a dad, I've got something going on in my life. Hey, here's my issue. What should I do? And a lot of times they're like, let's look at this issue and let me give you advice on this issue. Therapy is going to look beyond the issue and go, okay, tell me more. What's the history? Let's get into your life, your history. They're going to notice the pattern of certain things in your life, and they're going to trace that pattern back with you because you're the author. You're the one who has to author the story to them, and they're going to walk back through your life to find out, where did this go wrong? What was the coping mechanism you learned, and how many years have you lived with these various coping mechanisms? What have they yielded? And so it's a little bit more of the tree approach. And so I would say counseling, to receive wise counsel, is a lot of times like treating a branch. Therapy wants to get back to the root. And so there's a difference between therapy and just general wise counsel, right? Nothing against wise counsel. It's very good. I need it all the time. I just called my parents like last week because I always need some good wisdom from my parents. All right, let's listen on.
Therapy also, I think it's important to clarify that there are a bunch of different types of therapy. There is physical therapy. There's chemotherapy.
Right, we're not talking about, there's goat yoga therapy and all sorts of physical therapies and flu therapy, and there's TheraFlu. But we're talking about biblical counseling where you sit down and talk with someone who gives you wisdom and helps you to understand your relational challenges, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the most common type of therapy, at least within the U.S., is something called CBT therapy. And this is the definition of it. It's cognitive behavioral therapy.
So, yeah, and what they did there was they kind of combined two things. He said, what we're talking about here is biblical therapy. Like, he was like biblical counseling, sitting down with, someone and talking about life struggles. And he said, yeah, the most common type of therapy is CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So there's a blending of terms there, and I don't think that they meant to do that, but the average listener won't catch that. So you need to know, so CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is a lot of what I just talked about. It's about finding, so I talked about that pillar being shaken, and you develop these maladaptive coping mechanisms. If you hear a rattle or some things, it's because my baby's over there playing this little walker. Hi, baby. he's cute. I can't even explain. So, the thing so what I talked about is, you have that pillar shaken, but all of those maladaptive cognitions and all of that lead to a core thought. And that core thought a lot of times can be something damaging. I am broken, right? I am worthless. I am greedy. I'm a bad person, right? This cognition that someone, because they've had all these maladaptive coping mechanisms, let's say it's bullying, and so then they don't know why they started bullying. They didn't, something happened in their life and they felt like bullying was the best way to get attention, so they bullied all the time. And now they just they feel bad about it because they get punished about it. And then they, in their deepest core thought, they're like, I am a bully. I'm a bad person because I bully people. And should they bully people? No, it's a maladaptive coping mechanism. But CBT is going to find that cognition, and we're going to change I'm a bully to I'm a person capable of caring for others, right? We want to change that thought to I am trustworthy, I am good, right? And that's, again, I think that's biblical, but you're beautifully and wonderfully made. But it's just different than biblical counseling. There are two different practices here.
Which is based on the idea that your thoughts affect your feelings affect your actions. By changing distorted or unhealthy thinking, you can change the way you feel and or behave. So essentially, it's mental health counseling.
Yeah.
When you really boil it down. But I think we should go into the scriptures. I pulled a couple. I think you might have also a couple. Before we get into the verses that I found about therapy, I think it's also important to understand something about ourselves, about our hearts, about who we are, because that affects what counseling should look like. In Jeremiah 17:9, it says, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?"
Yeah.
So that's telling something about us and our nature, essentially. In Mark 7:20-23, it says, "What comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness.
Okay, let's talk about these verses because this is a big tension with therapy. When I read No Bad Parts, when I studied internal family systems, all of these are based around the idea that there's no such thing as a bad person, right? And the self, the inner self, is always good. Sorry about the rattle, but the inner self is always good. We'll end on this note too, because we're already at 35 minutes, so we'll wrap up here. But you guys should watch the rest of it. If you want me to reflect on the rest of this, let me know. But really, I wanted to talk about counseling versus therapy. But I got a baby who wants to play, so I'm gonna go. And the video's long enough, anyways. Huh, baby? Yeah, he's smiling. All right. So, anyways, in therapy, the belief is that the inner self, is truly good. Whereas in Christian theology, we would say the flesh, the inner man, we need to take the heart of stone out and be given a heart of flesh. We need to be made a new creation in Christ. And so those seem at odds, and to a degree they can be sometimes. I do think that and that's where I sit in the middle of all this, and I say, yeah, there's time for regeneration. There's time for a baptism, right? For a handing over of the self to God. And so as a Christian, I believe that healing the self is required. And so traditional therapy will say, trust yourself. Theology will say, trust God. And a lot of times his institution, the church. And I would say, trust God with your whole self, right? So follow God with your whole self. And where the self is right is when it follows God, and where the self is wrong is when it disobeys God. And a lot of the times in my sessions with people, when I find those maladaptive coping strategies or mechanisms or bad cognitions, it's usually wrapped up in somewhere where they have operated with fear over trusting God or redeeming God. So when you learn the institutions in your life are not good, or are harmed, right? Whether it be your church, your family, your school, whatever, you then become more self-reliant. I need to find a way to save myself, to help myself, to feed myself, right? To care for myself. And a lot of times we do that through stealing or lying or bullying or lust or whatever. And so I would identify that moment and go, oh, okay, like you couldn't trust the institution. But you also really your initial, therefore I must do this was bad. Your therefore was bad. Where do we find true healing? Let's turn to God. Let's see what he would ask of us. Let's see true health, and let's trust him ultimately to be the source and provider of all the health and healing that we would need. And so that's where I'm going to differ from a therapist in what I do. Now, I still go, okay, but your nervous system's out of whack, right? Let's talk about how the polyvagal nervous system works, right? Let me help you understand that when you're in your ventral vagal nervous system versus your dorsal or your parasympathetic nervous system, right? The different modes your body goes in. Let me talk through grounding techniques. Let me talk through these cognitions. Let me use some of these therapy tactics like the drill down method to go, you said this, what does that mean? And what does that mean? And what does that mean? All the way back. Okay. And if this is true, then what does it say about yourself? What says this about me? Okay. There we found the cognition. And so there's these tools, these practices. Internal family systems is another great tool for therapists that pastors won't usually use. And that is when you say, part of me feels this and part of me feels that. Like part of me loves it, part of me hates it. Okay, let's actually break down that language a little bit more clinically. What do you mean by those parts, right? Because there could be a part of you, I like internal family systems. There could be a part of you that, there's a little wounded kid somewhere in you who's still starving, who's still disappointed, who's still being hurt over and over. And then you've got a protector in you who's like, never under my watch will my little me ever get hurt again. But that part of you is bullying or lying or stealing. And so there's these clinical tools. All in all, we'll wrap up with this. There's a lot I could say here. but I'll try to keep it short and simple. All in all, I'll say this: you should go to therapy, and you should have a pastoral counselor, right? You should have a therapist help you with cognitions, help you with maladaptive coping strategies, track trauma in your life, especially if you're dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or a lot of people have complex PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That's when your trauma comes from multiple sources, not just one. You want to track these things. You want to work through these things. Also, you want biblical wisdom. And it's a little difficult. I found when I had Christian therapists, sometimes, sorry, we're going to wrap up. My kid is being so sweet. I found when I got a Christian therapist, sometimes their theology got in the way of my healing. And as a seminarian, I was like, I'll handle the Bible, right? I'm good with that. I need you to trace this cognition for me. So it was interesting, but I started to hire, when I was in a really bad way, I lost a loved one, I was going through a divorce, a lot of hard stuff in my life. I started asking for non-Christian therapists because I wasn't there for theology support. I needed the clinical therapeutic practice to be done with me. And then sometimes medication to be prescribed, sometimes not. And then I go to pastors when I need prayer and help and guidance in the Word of God. And so sometimes separating them is the cleanest option. Of course, I do what I do because I think you want people like me out there, right? That's why I do it. I think I'm in a important role. I'm going to give you both, but I'm going to let you know when therapy is therapy, like when we're doing CBT and IFS and nervous system training, and then when I'm putting on my pastor hat and when we're doing biblical training, right? And there's a dance. Sometimes you got to step over here, you got to step over there, right? And you can't do that when you have just a therapist or you have just a pastor. So I think we do need more and more people in the in-between. And then, of course, people like me need to have wisdom and go, now, this is beyond me. Let me get you to a substance abuse counselor, right? Let's get you into rehab. Let's get you into an AA or Celebrate Recovery or something like that. Okay. I don't know if you can hear him. He's talking like his daddy. All right. I will let you guys go. But I hope this has been an important conversation for you guys, and maybe guiding for some of you guys. When should you go to therapy? When should you go to just pastoral counseling? How can you find someone? If you need someone in the middle, feel free. I didn't make this video for this reason. I'm responding to Kirk Cameron. But if you want to schedule a session with me, soulward.org. Go book a session with me. We can chat. I'll talk to you guys in the comments too if you want more nuanced conversations. And yeah, ultimately, I just want to make sure everyone is helped. All right, baby. He's loving it. He's talking just like his daddy. He thinks he's on a podcast. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.